So welcome, happy Friday to Live with the Zone. Today we have Ross Perkins. He is from the College of Education here at Boise State, and he wants to lead us in a discussion about MOOCs and about accreditation, about getting credit for MOOCs, how that might work in a traditional classroom and in the fully online experience.
Thank you, everybody, and it's here. Yeah, I am from the College of Education. I'm actually in the educational technology department. We teach, so you know, we are the largest degree program on campus. We have more than 500 students in our master's degree program in educational technology. We just started this past year. This is a Doctor of Education in Educational Technology. I'm the program coordinator for that program. We have both programs, the Master's of Educational Technology and the Doctorate, as well as our Master's of Science. Not too many students are enrolled in the MS program, but we are entirely online. We have been entirely online for the past probably 15 years now. With the Department of Ed Tech started its online master's degree program, I think, around 1998. I've been here at Boise State for the past 5 years, since 2008. So I teach, my primary teaching responsibilities are dealing with evaluation and instructional design. But this current semester, I'm actually facilitating an independent study with one other student who's an MET student of ours in Colorado, and it's specifically exploring MOOCs and MOOC-based education. And we're looking at, we are co-writing a white paper for Boise State University about what MOOCs mean to BSU. Now, last week, Dale Pike, the Director of Academic Technologies here at Boise State, talked about the big picture of MOOCs, gave a definition of MOOCs. I'm not going to retread the ground that he's already covered. Any of this information is, as Mark Wheeler, the Dean of Extended Studies, has often remarked that there's a new article about a MOOC coming out every 3 seconds, and he's just about right. My graduate student, the graduate student with whom I'm working, and myself, every week we're updating a site that we share among ourselves, a Google site, and there's always new articles, new things from the Chronicle of Higher Ed, new things in the New York Times, something that somebody wrote here or there. Not a lot of peer-reviewed articles as yet, necessarily, although MOOCs have been around for a few years. There are some very good articles on that, but so there's a lot to digest that's out there. Right now, the basic thing that I wanted to do in this talk today was not a presentation. Can get pretty stale. And the time I'm done with the first 3 slides, there'll be another 4 articles or newspaper. So let's have a conversation of giving credit for MOOC basis. It's because I'll just give you a brief thumbnail at BSU. We first started talking about it. I think the conversation was spurred by Provost Schimpf last fall in a College of Education meeting, and he went around and met with the different colleges and talked about the changing university, and talked about what is higher education going to look like 10 years? How is that going to be different than what it looks like right now? And in that conversation, he talked about MOOCs, and of course, it's something in our field that we discuss. Online education, whether it's MOOC or there's a small section of 6 students, we talk about these things and deal with issues of distance education all the time. But in the way that he raised it, it became apparent that this conversation was fairly new to Boise State. So beginning in January or February, I began to seriously investigate, okay, what are we doing? What is BSU doing with regard to MOOCs? Because we, in the Department of Educational Technology, certainly want to be part of that conversation, no matter how it happens, because we feel like that's, to use the cliche, within our wheelhouse. What I have investigated so far, and the graduate student Kay, who I'm working with, she has done some interviews with some folks across campus, both in eCampus, and I think she's talked to some of Dale's people over in academic technologies. She's talked to Susan Shadle over, right across the street here at the Center for Teaching and Learning. Right now, it does not look like Boise State is going full bore toward the development of its own MOOCs. So you're talking about, and the reason why we're not really going down that path is a simple matter of human capacity. Dale's shop in academic technology primarily deals with people who are looking to do hybridized courses. So it's possible that he could eventually work with people who want to have a massively open online section of psychology, but then do their own 30-person section of psychology here on campus. Or they might do it so that anybody in the world can take, and I'm picking on psychology, I'm just calling it out because it tends to be, even on campus course, tends to be a fairly large section enrollment. I mean, even if we looked at something like, Math 101, it's, got a large number of students in that, even for traditional campuses. And what typically happens, though, is that even within, and I've been at Boise State for 5 years, but previous to that, I was 10 years at Virginia Tech. And they have a very large math emporium where all entry-level students go into this large converted shopping mall space with 500 Macintosh computers and do all of their mathematics, Math 101 to I think even through sophomore level, they're doing it on the computer. And there have been a lot of studies on the math emporium and that type of model. Virginia Tech is certainly not the only university that uses it. In any case, what happens in those courses, a lot of times you'll have recitation sections. Same is true in psychology, same is true in physics, where you'll have 300 people enrolled in course XXX, and then once a week or twice a week they go to a 30-person recitation section and interact with typically a graduate assistant or somebody. What in the conversations I've had here about MOOCs is it may be that anybody in the world can do MOOCs, can take the MOOC content from Boise State, but the people who are getting credit for that MOOC are the people who are physically on campus in a recitation section. So it makes it a little bit of a hybrid course in the sense that part of it's online and part of it's on campus. But then there would be people who could be physically present to get credit for the name of the course. So there's a possibility in the future of us doing some MOOC-based courses, but in eCampus, which is over in the Yankee Center, associated with Boise State, they are so I wouldn't say overwhelmed because they're very capable people there, but they're so focused on just getting on-campus programs, like the new Doctor of Nurse Practitioner program online, that they don't have the number of people needed to really take a course and do an excellent job at MOOC. I mean, you could set up a MOOC right now. You could go into Google Forms or Google Documents. You could set up some content. You could scan some handouts that you do for your own classes. You could advertise the link, and there's the content. I mean, that's that anybody could access. And so, really, calling it a course is really a simple matter. But it then becomes, how do you register people? How do you track their progress? How do you continue to send them updates? How do you facilitate discussion boards? I mean, you have this continuum of what instructional design decisions you make when you're creating an online course, whether you're creating it for a class of 25 people that you want to convert to be online here at Boise State, or if you're making it for 5,000 people. Now, obviously, there are certain things that happened with an economy of scale. There's a story that happened, I think this is 2 months ago, reported in the Chronicle of Higher Education, where, ironically, there was a woman, I think at Georgia Tech, who was teaching a MOOC about how to design or create online courses. It broke down within 3 weeks, I think, of the course being up. The reason it broke down was she had this fantastic idea for using Google Documents to help facilitate these small groups. And you've only got 100 people, that's not really an issue. When you've got whatever scale was, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 people, it basically looked to Google like they were experiencing a denial of service attack. and they shut everything down. And so as a result of that activity failing, the course shut down. So when you're talking about instructional design decisions for a MOOC, you're talking about a very carefully systematic, planned way of approaching a course that might be entirely different than the way that course is being currently taught on campus. So again, I'm not here to talk about instructional design and MOOCs, but I'm just giving you the kind of the background of why at Boise State it's not likely that there will be a lot of activity there unless there's one person, one faculty member, who has the know-how and has the passion and has the drive to really pick up that flag and carry it forward. There may or may not be enough available support. As great as eCampus folks are, and as talented as they are, and as talented as Dale's people are, we might have the capacity to handle it for one professor, but not certainly to the extent the resources that other campuses are throwing at MOOC development. Dale last week, I'm sure, talked about why campuses even want to do MOOCs. Here at Boise State, what would make a person attracted into a BSU class or any Idaho institution? Why would it be any great thing to take psychology from in a 5,000 person section psychology class from BSU or University of Idaho or Harvard? Now, all fine institutions, but I know which one has more name recognition. And that's something that we don't necessarily have in psychology, but we do have it in Basque studies. We do have it in raptor biology. We do have some niche courses that would be BSU specific that we could offer if we wanted to do that. So that's one way. The one reason why MOOCs are developed is for public relations reasons, is to put the name out there. But the other reason they're developed is kind of lost leaders. And what a lot of institutions are looking at for MOOCs is using a MOOC as a way to say, hey, if you do English is a bad one to say. Let's leave math, because math is a little bit more straightforward in terms of assessment than grading essays. Not necessarily. But let's just say that you could do that. You could say, if you take Math 101 through our MOOC, then you're not going to get credit for it. But if you enroll as a student at Boise State University and you have a certificate of completion for that course, now you're already ahead of the game with credit hours. Because that's what been the big discussion here over the past couple of years, is how do you take students who are already so incredibly overwhelmed with the number of hours they have to do in a short 4-year time period and fitting it all in that 4 years. I mean, many campuses are moving toward that guarantee to graduate in 4 years because, well, cost, right? And just time that a student who spends an extra year in school, let's say, for example, that student is an engineering student, who can't get into all the classes that he or she wants. Must be a friend of mine. So, the problem is with that person who stays away from school for an extra year as an engineering student is now losing potentially $65,000 to $65,000 in that year, and instead is paying school X for that year's experience, going further in debt, not making money, not contributing to a retirement system. So the overall economic cost to a student who spends that extra year in school, I'm sure, has been calculated. But so why wouldn't you want to use whatever resources are available through informal training to give that student some credit where he or she can finish earlier? So let me just look at these questions real quick. If faculty evaluations are considered for advancement, how will MOOCs impact that? The dropout completion rate isn't consistent with real learning and outcome objectives. Even if BSU isn't considering this yet, how will they manage attrition and evaluative feedback? It's a good question. And I don't know that current evaluations are necessarily correlated with real learning and outcome objectives. I've had many conversations in the research that I'm doing on campus and myself. I mean, I moved from assistant to associate last year. I'm very familiar with student evaluations, but student evaluations on this campus are not, and I don't think on any campuses, are associated with real learning and outcome objectives. It's not like we look at student scores and student learning and then say, okay, well, this professor might have had low evaluation outcomes, but hey, look how much his students have gained, or look how much our students have done over the past semester. Those aren't necessarily correlated. So I have some question about the way that we do professor feedback and evaluation anyway. But I do think that attrition, in my mind, attrition is more of an issue when it comes to the public relations aspect of the MOOC. And if the university is putting itself, any university is putting itself out there as being a provider of content, whatever, let's just say it's Basque Studies. Let's say we have a couple of introductory Basque classes, both Basque language and Basque culture. Well, I mean, obviously there are political issues in that involved as well, because you have a whole region of another country and even immigrants within this country that are going to be represented by that. But if Boise State puts itself out there and says, hey, we're doing this MOOC on Basque Studies, then again, on that instructional design continuum, you're going to want to make a course that's extremely good and has stickiness, has people that want to complete it. But really, in the end, MOOCs work a lot like Walmart. You walk in and sometimes people go in with a specific thing to buy, and they wind up buying 3 or 4 other things, but they're not going to spend $600. They're not going to necessarily they're not going to make or break the day of sales for that store. They're going to become people that come in, they go in to look for the hardware section, they don't find it, they leave, they go to Lowe's or Home Depot. There are other people that go in and they seek only to buy, like myself many times, 1 or 2 things and wind up walking out with a Barbie movie and extra cat food and various things that I didn't need going in. So I think that MOOCs have to be understood for what they are. They're in many cases they're going to be like window shopping, and I have done it myself, and I've had a lot of friends who've done it. Signed up for MOOCs, and I've spent all of 14 minutes maybe looking at the content, looking at the design, and saying, yeah, it'd be nice if I had time to actually do this. But I don't have time, so I'm going to back away. As far as managing attrition, though, and evaluation, I think that it's going to come down to really very specific, again, systematic instructional design planning and trying to make this class the best ever. Now, why would somebody take a psychology course in a MOOC from Boise State? Not necessarily because of the name of Boise State. I mean, we have the blue turf. That only goes so far. People would take that course because they knew it was the absolute best that was offered. Of the 15 institutions offering MOOCs on psychology, the one from BSU is the one that stands out as being one that lines up against all quality rubrics for distance education, online education, as being interactive, as being one where there's great content, as being one that's fun. I mean, why do people go back to certain websites? It's the same type of thinking. Really, one has to change the thinking away from, I mean, of course academics has to be included, but it has to be included in the sense we have to very much consider the marketing aspect of it. We have to think less like the university of the past, where you only focused on learning outcomes, and integrate in there the thinking of Nike, or the thinking of Adidas, or the thinking of Under Armour. I'm just calling out sports apparel companies, but you can insert anything there. Is why do people want to buy their product when the market shelves are overwhelmed with it? When I go down the cereal aisle, why do I want to buy Rice Krispies as opposed to Corn Puffs, as opposed to some chocolate cereal? Because it has to. We have to wrap our heads more around that aspect of the marketing piece of it, and that's somewhat of an anathema to higher education. It's not always something that people immediately consider when designing courses, because you have a captive audience on campus. You can kind of do what you want. They're going to sit there and they're going to suffer. Well, it's not the case, because we have a lot of dedicated people who do a very good job. But in terms of MOOC thinking, there's a huge piece of it that's marketing related. So what do you see as the most significant differences between disciplines as far as MOOCs are concerned, or just in general between the humanities versus science versus arts? I think it's a good question, because I think there are many people who still have questions about what can be taught online and what cannot be taught online, or what can be taught well online and what can't be taught well online, or some pieces that might be able to be taught well online if there are small sections of people rather than if there are very large sections of people. Well, first of all, I'll say, of course, I'm biased. I teach in an online program. My background for the past many years has been in distance education. My degree is in instructional technology, and I've done a lot with it. So I would say confidently that one can teach anything online. But there are some places where the assessment of what one teaches online cannot happen. And I say that as a former EMT. I can tell you that it's very easy to learn the principles of cardiopulmonary resuscitation online. But I would want to make sure if I were assessing an EMT skills or a person learning CPR skills, I would want to see that their chest compressions were not too deep on a mannequin. Because breaking a sternum is really a bad deal when you're giving CPR. Breaking ribs, not considered a good thing. How can you do that online? Now, can you take a mannequin and hook it up by USB to measure compressions? Yeah, you can do that. There's certainly a possibility of doing that alone. But there are some softer sides of the EMT skills that's, for example, patient care in the back of an ambulance that can be simulated face-to-face one-on-one because you're not going to be dealing with a mannequin in the back of an ambulance. So could you do CPR in a MOOC? Oh, yeah, parts of it you could. But there are parts that couldn't. And I think when we're looking at these different courses between the disciplines, I think it comes down to what are the priorities of assessment? What are the pieces that are really, truly important? And I think that thinking about accreditation in particular and the way that we assess coursework, if you want to have a course that if you want to have content that is just merely knowledge replication or a simple algorithm application, whether that's in mathematics or some other piece, then that can be assessed in a fairly straightforward manner. But there are other pieces, and if you think about it from the standpoint of Bloom's taxonomy, looking at the very basic level of Bloom's, at the very bottom where you're just talking about knowledge, just comprehension, just easy stuff, right? 2 + 2 is 4. Those things, we can scale that assessment. Where it becomes difficult is when we have tasks that ask people to synthesize and evaluate. And that requires more careful thinking about how we assess and how we give credit for those types of experiences. And I was a former English teacher before I went to graduate school, or as I finished my master's degree. And to be quite honest, there are certainly technologies that read text and do that now. I've not used them personally, but I would think that if you are in a senior level literature class, a senior level Shakespeare class, that there's probably a lot that you as a professor would want to see a student write about in a composition in that class that would be very difficult to assess in any type of automated or scalable way. So I would say that a class like that, well, maybe there's content in that MOOC. Maybe part of it could be, it's a dumb word, but MOOCify, in the sense that you have a lot of people all discussing about maybe they're looking at Macbeth and Richard III, and they're comparing it to House of Cards, the Netflix series that I've been watching lately. That would be a great experience to have a lot of people in the same room talking about it. There's a lot of richness there that could come, because in any given senior level Shakespeare class, you might have 25 students and maybe one of them has seen it. You don't really get much friction. But in an online environment, a MOOC-based environment, there could be a lot that happens. But then actually assessing that piece of a comparative piece of writing that shows that the person has that ability to synthesize is probably not something that can be done. And the same is true with engineering. There's going to be some courses in engineering at the very front end of engineering courses that are very easy to scale and assess the content knowledge from. But at the end of it, when students move away from the knowledge piece, when they get to the synthesis piece, which means problem solving, advanced problem solving, which means taking these little bits of information that they've had along the way, taking these procedures that they've learned, and then putting them together to solve an ambiguous, ill-defined problem, which is what engineers do, and what we want to use that as an authentic piece when they get to their senior level courses, because this is what they're going to be doing in the real world. How do you do that in a huge section? I would say that there are some real challenges there to make that authentic. You probably would have to back it out where you have smaller discussion rooms to do that, smaller recitation sections, as it were, to deal with that type of assessment. So I do think there are differences between the disciplines, but I think each discipline brings its own challenge. But I would also say that none of those challenges are insurmountable. When I was considering about different, again, going back to accreditation and how departments on this campus, on BSU's campus, would react to giving credit for MOOC-based experiences, it's going to look different for each department. Because in some cases, the content is very closely connected to what that department has to offer. And they might even be able to develop assessment pieces that allow students to gain credit for it. In our case, in educational technology, there are courses that are related to ed tech in some ways. You know, for example, Coursera this past year, the first 8 weeks of, well, there was an 8-week or 10-week period, which was January, February, March, that had to do with digital learning and humanities. There was a course I think I saw on edX about social networking analysis. Those are courses that, you know, we probably could develop courses like that within our graduate program. But what about a student who takes that course and says, it comes to our department and says, hey, I've taken these courses, these MOOCs, and I have the certificate from Coursera, and it's a little thing that I printed out, and here's my certificate, and I'd like to get credit for it. Well, I mean, when somebody's transferring credit from another university, we look at a transcript. I mean, it's not like we just take them at their word, because you'd be kind of foolish, I think, to do that, as far as wanting to maintain your regional accreditation. and also, if we wanted to maintain NK accreditation, we would be fools to simply rely on a person's word. But we might look at that content and then develop some type of piece about how does this make sense for ed tech credit. And I've already been talking to the graduate college. I've already been talking to professional development folks here on campus, and looking at how we can do this. Now, what we have to our advantage in our program is that I teach a class called evaluation, and students in our program, it behooves them to learn how to evaluate various educational experiences. A MOOC is an educational experience. They could, to get credit for our program, do a MOOC, but as part of their work for our class, they would be submitting maybe regular posts or regular feedback about the instructional design decisions, about the distance learning provisions that are being made within that. So the content would be irrelevant, whether they're taking a course in genetics and evolution from Duke University, or taking the underwater basket weaving course that was advertised on April Fool's Day through Coursera. They could take a look at those courses and give us and provide information and do some learning about evaluation that may not necessarily fit in other departments' curriculum. But what if a student who goes through Khan Academy and finishes up through calculus in Khan Academy, which is not a MOOC per se. I mean, Khan Academy is just really the content. It's kind of in a game-based situation where you go through and you get stars for completing these different levels. But I don't know if you paid attention to the news over the past couple of years, there are some elementary school teachers that are freaking out because their 5th graders have already completed up through algebra. And they don't know what to do in the classroom. I'm like, well, that's not the student's fault. And it's certainly not the internet's fault. Maybe there needs to be a way to let that student go beyond long division in 5th grade and start doing something beyond, maybe some geometry, and maybe use some calculus. And there are students who are going up through that level. Now, are there a lot of them? I don't know. But we have to make provisions for this type of informal learning, whether it's quote unquote MOOC offered through Udacity or Coursera or edX or whatever else, or the local universities. Or whether it's even more informal than a MOOC. For example, there's something called Wikiversity, which is a bunch of content that's created through a wiki. It's a little bit like Wikipedia, except that there is this more of a course flow in Wikiversity. I've spent a great deal of time with it. But Khan Academy is another example. But if you look at it, I've been working here on campus with some geologists, and when we first started some work we were doing a couple of years ago, and I don't have any background in geology, I was looking at what kind of resources are available for people that want to teach age of the Earth. And this is a particular project that we're looking at in middle school. So all 8th grade and 9th grade students in Idaho have a geological sciences curriculum, and within that curriculum, at one point or another, they learn, not only they learn about climate and dinosaurs, but they also look at age of the Earth, geochronology. How do we know? What do scientists do to make that, to gain that knowledge? And there's different ways to do that. Well, if you go online and you look at some of the resources that are available from the U.S. Geological Services, there's some incredibly good content that's been created through grants over the years. Students who are sufficiently motivated can learn that themselves. They don't necessarily need to be part of an 8th grade or 9th grade class. More about or dinosaurs or climate change. It's on the internet. You just Google it. You can find it. So that's what a MOOC does, right? MOOC provides that kind of value menu approach that McDonald's and Burger King is taking. Everything used to just be listed on the board a number of years ago, and then they went to value meals, and you go up and you say, oh, I want that hamburger, that fries, and that drink, and that's kind of what a MOOC does, right? Well, any course really. So, in any case. But going back to credit again, and what that looks like, really, what I wanted to do though was have a conversation with you all and talk about what are the. And I don't have maybe I'll just write it here on the computer, but talk about possibilities and talk about challenges from your own department, from your own experience. If you're not even in a department, but if you're looking at it from your own perspective, if Boise State University wanted to give credit for a MOOC, how would it do that? Like I said, for our own program, we have one approach. And I'll just say that, I was sharing with Jeff before you all came in, and this is not to brag on myself as an expert language learner, because I've only taken, I've had French and Latin and Spanish, but I'm not a language whiz, and I don't speak French that well anymore. But when I was an exchange student many years ago in Belgium, I had taken 4 years of Spanish. I went to Belgium without any knowledge of French. So I had a Romance language, but I didn't have French specifically. I lived with a French-speaking family, and I lived in the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. There's 2 parts of Belgium, French in the south, Wallonia, and the Flanders is the Dutch-speaking part. So I was kind of in this hybrid situation of knowing Spanish, living with a French-speaking family in the Dutch-speaking region. And I was there for 9 months rather than 10.5 months. When I got back, I enrolled in College French 101 in a small private school in upstate New York. And my first day in class, the professor, I must have said something or had a conversation with him, and he said, maybe you should take the CLEP test. And I said, what is the CLEP test? He said, well, you can get college credit for what you already know. I was like, I've known French for 9 months. I don't really know much. And I took the CLEP test. So my whole experience in Belgium, I was in a school, but I learned French. I had French friends, French-speaking friends. My host family was French-speaking. None of it was formal, but I went and took the CLEP test, and I got 12 credit hours of college French. I CLEP'd out of 2 years of college French. It would have been a supreme waste of my time and money to be in College French 101, 102, 202, 203, or 201, and 202. My learning was recognized. And we do that we still have CLEP tests. We CLEP for math, we have AP placement tests, we have all kinds of transfer credits that we don't recognize necessarily as a person's behind in our seat and giving credit for that. So, opening the conversation to the folks online and the folks in the room, for your own specific department, if a student, this is a scenario, and I don't know where all of you are from, but if a student said, I have just taken a MOOC in this particular course that you know is related to your area, and I've paid $50 for my certificate for that, what are the challenges and what are the possibilities of that person getting credit for that experience? And you can tell me where you're from. I know you're from Matt, but what are some of the ideas that you might have? Because I really think that Boise State is going down this road. I think we'll probably, that tech might be the first department that really starts to explore it. But I think more and more departments departments will continue to explore it, because we cannot ignore the amount of information that's being put out there in quasi-formal or sometimes very formal ways in a MOOC that allows people to learn. And are we just going to ignore their experience and their learning? So I think it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. But then the question becomes how. How do we approach it? And if there is going to be developed on campus a MOOC authorization office, what kind of things does it have to pay attention to? And I'm not starting a room. I actually don't know that that's happening. But just I can imagine that the registrar's office is going to have to deal with it at some point sooner or later. So.
I mean, I guess I might just ask, you know, how do we deal with? I mean, I don't know the answer to this so much, but how do we deal with transfer credits? I mean, a student comes into BSU having had a year of calculus in high school, we make them take a test, and I don't know exactly the mechanics because I'm still fairly new here, but it's not rare to see a student in your Calculus 1 course who's already had a year of calculus.
Mm-hmm.
And they sit there kind of bored, thinking that they know the material. It doesn't necessarily mean they ace the course, but for whatever reason, we had some reason to believe they needed to take it again.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we already do this in some sense. And I don't know why we would treat a MOOC any differently.
That's a good question.
Assuming that the material is more or less the same material, I mean, we really couldn't treat it any differently.
Mm-hmm.
Students spent their senior year of high school doing calculus online and asked for transfer credit. Why would we have any way of making how would we have a way of distinguishing that activity from having spent a year in a classroom course if they're find the exam on whatever their score on whatever exam we require is identical.
Mm-hmm. And then the question, my question would become what's good enough? You know, if a student's in the math with calculus, and the student was required to complete that calculus for his or her engineering degree,
Mm-hmm.
you know, does the person have to have a B+ in order for that credit to count? No. Does the person have to have a C-? Probably. I don't know if it would count with a D+, but if you're talking about an actual test score, if a student got a 69.999 on that transfer test, would that be enough for us to say, oh, yeah, I mean, if somebody was in my class for a semester and had a 70%, had a C-, could eke it out, you know what? That credit counts.
Well,
that person's moving on with the degree.
Yeah.
So it's a question that I think someone would hold up as being problematic and say, well, if somebody's coming out of an informal experience, they should have a higher score. I don't know,
I mean, I just wonder if there isn't if you had no idea how that person got their calculus knowledge.
Right.
All you knew is that they were interested in getting credit for whatever knowledge they had. You say, okay, here's a test, take the test, you pass this test, you get credit. I mean,
now would it be? Do you
so
think
you can't really confuse the? I think there's a bias against an online course. People assume that you didn't learn as much,
right?
Maybe,
no,
or you did it while you were watching TV,
right.
or you had your best friend help you. But in a way, we have no way of measuring. Our measuring tools are not good enough. And if that person can,
right, and I would say that even for a 25-section Calc 1 class where there's a teacher-created test, that measuring tool is problematic as well.
Right.
But
it's all problematic.
Right. So I do wonder though if there's going and not if there are already organizations, companies that are founding themselves on the accreditation of informal learning experiences. And so, rather than having a transcript from CWI that I've had these classes, I might have a transcript that's authenticated by, Ross Perkins' big assessment company. And, looking at that is that my company has these various testing centers around the United States that a student has come in with his or her, identification and sat down and taken the test that has been vetted nationally and say, yes, we call this good. We bless this as a Calculus 1 credit. This person has equivalent to 120 or however many hours we have, 120 hours, semester hours of Calculus 1 credit. what they've done shows that they might have well been sitting a seat for 15 weeks on a college campus. What goes?
Why would we let a company do that though? Because that is our job.
Why not? You can outsource it. Everything's cheaper if you outsource.
But why would we let a company decide, what qualifies as calculus knowledge when that isn't the one remaining thing that we can actually do?
Do you think that Boise State would have a different calculus standard than Washington State or Oregon State or Portland State or Virginia Tech?
Oh, there's different standards all over the place.
For calculus.
Absolutely.
For calculus.
Oh yeah.
So you wouldn't say that there's a general amount of knowledge that somebody would have to be able to show competency in calculus.
Well, I think you're going to find.
I don't mean to argue with you.
You're going to find wide agreement. Let's put it that
right.
way.
Okay. So what I'm saying is that if a company develops that wide agreement, what a company has as an advantage is economy of scale. And so if you have, for example, the 3,000. Now Boise State is 22,000 students or so, and any given entry class, coming in is going to be 3,000 students, whatever the incoming classes are. How do you test all of those people? And would it make more sense for those people to be tested in a way that they're paying for outside? And the only thing that Boise State has to do is, rather than having personnel design the test, update the test, administer the test, grade the test, enter the test, all that you're doing now is one person saying, "Oh yeah, Ross is a big company, accredited this guy or this woman, and we're gonna give that person free credit hours." So again, there are many models that can exist, but see what's going to happen beyond this is it's okay to do it for one class or two classes, or maybe even 9 credit hours. The person is tested out of. What about what happens when this person has done content from all over in a period of 2.5 years, and Ross's big company looks at it and says, "You know what? This person has equivalent to a 4-year degree. Which university out there is going to give this person a 4-year degree? Let's say it's a bachelor's of science in computer science. Is that person has all of the knowledge necessary to go out from maybe the person has spent 20 years in the military, didn't go to college, but has done a job, maybe an engineering job, that work experience, life experience has made that person probably a better problem solver than the 22-year-old who walks out with a BS in engineering from any school. But now this person has taken it upon him or herself while in the military to go through these informal learning experiences. And then somebody can say, "Yeah, geez, this person can do the job. This person can do the job." And that's really where I think where the crux of the question is that what are we authenticating? Are we authenticating the fact that the seat has been warm for 15 weeks? Or are we authenticating knowledge and skill? And then there's a bigger philosophical argument, especially among the peoples and humanities. And I would make that argument that there's a certain amount of informal learning that goes on within the classroom, that goes on in the college campus. Is that I just saw on the way here, walking here to this center, in the middle of campus in front of the admin building, there's a guy there. I think he's become the campus preacher. I don't really know his name. But it's typically where one finds literature being passed out from any number of denominations. And the gentleman was standing there, engaged with a couple of students, talking about whatever brand of religion or politics he was talking about. I don't actually know his name. But that experience of a one-on-one conversation with somebody, whether it's in a dorm, whether it's in a classroom, whether it's between classes, whether it's on campus, I think is a valuable experience. Again, these are bigger philosophical issues. But if you start talking about university as a business, and it is a business, and people are wanting to have value added for that business that helps them become more integrated into the marketplace more quickly, then if there are agencies, and if there are universities, first of all, if there are agencies that say, "Yeah, we will give you experience, we will give you credit, we will recognize your informal learning experiences, we'll give you credit for them," there is going to be a university that comes along and says, "Yes, we will give you that commensurate degree that meets with that." Now, would it be something that Boise State never does? I don't know. But people are shopping. That we will call students, but when you get beyond maybe that 18 and 19 and 20-year-old stage, you talk about non-traditional students, and it's not a criticism of them. It's just the reality. People are shopping. They're consumers. Our educational technology program, I think, is one of the best in the United States in the master's level. We're building the doctoral level. We'll get there eventually. But when we have people coming into that program, I hear why they come. I hear why they've applied to our EDD program, And they say, I've looked around. I've looked very many places, and this is the program that I've chosen. And there is that sense of, I'm going to make a choice between going into Walmart or Target or Kohl's or Sears. And there's those choices exist. So how does the university of the future can't simply sit back and say people are just going to come because we're here, and that's the only choice they have. It's not the only choice they have anymore. And so what do we do to respond to credit? Now you're suggesting, and it's not a bad suggestion at all, is that we would test people. We would give them credit based on what we see they do. I think the other question is, do we ever give people credit for something that we don't see them do?
I mean, there's not a very good model for that. I mean, we don't give somebody, unless the degree, I mean, again, the only situation in which you would do that is if you come with a certificate from a university saying that I completed 4 years, then we tend to say, okay, I didn't actually need to see you physically at the university. I didn't actually need to see, but I will ascribe value to that certificate because I know that university.
Right. Well, as I say the same thing we do with transfer credits now. Is that it's very unlikely that a student who says, hey, I took math, I took calculus at CWI, we would not say, okay, I want to see pictures of you in class every day, and I want to make sure that I authenticate you as being a student at CWI, because we don't know. And CWI is a fine institution. They have their own regulations and controls over there. I'm not suggesting anything about CWI. I have an associate's degree. I love community colleges, so I'm not going to go there. But it's this could happen anywhere. A student never shows up to class, maybe enough to get a grade, comes home, his girlfriend or her boyfriend does the homework and submits it, and he or she passes the final test in whatever way, gets the C, comes to Boise State. Hey, I've got calculus from CWI. Oh, that's fine. All right, here you go. Here's your calculus credit. I mean, that's all we do. So, what makes that experience different than somebody who has been authenticated through a MOOC, an online platform, through a MOOC, and then comes away with a certificate that says, I've done 10 weeks of this work, and this is what we went through. I would like to have experience for it. Now we've got to test them, and now we've got to do this or that. I'm not saying those things are wrong necessarily. It's just one other thing to think about is that we can't have a double standard. And this is something that frequently happens in distance education when people say, they make this just asinine remark, well, that if it's taught online, it's not as good as face-to-face class. Well, I tell people that I've had the fortunate experience of having many wonderful face-to-face classes and online. And I should say in person because you can do face-to-face by Skype. But I've also had a lot of face-to-face classes, in-person classes that have sucked. There was nothing redeeming about that class. The fact that I was in a seat, surrounded by peers who were as bored or as pissed off as I was, that we had to be in that class. And there are online courses that outstrip those in every way. There's nothing about it happening in a room that makes it magical. What makes it magical is always the design. So the fact that there are going to be biases built in, but I think we really have to step back and take a look at why do those biases exist. There obviously there are pressures that we are under to make sure that we're authenticating learning because we have something called, was it the Northwest accrediting body that accredits Boise State and all the regional institutions. We have the National Council for Accreditation of Teacher Education, NCATE. That's a very big deal in my college that has its own standards. And so there are things that we still have to live underneath that are part of that. But as an institution, when we look at accrediting for MOOCs, I do think that we have to stand back and look at, okay, what are our biases and what are the possibilities and what really do we want to make a claim here? I don't know the answers to that. Like I said, I think it's going to look different for every department on campus, but to be scalable and to be useful, and so the registrar doesn't go nuts, which I think would be probably a bad idea to make the registrar upset, is there's probably going to have to be some type of centralized approach. You know, maybe different for every department, just like there are different, you know, standards for somebody completing a major within every department. That's fine. Of course, we live with that. You know, how does accreditation work differently? I don't know, but it's all going to go through. It's probably going to have to go through one resource, because I cannot very well imagine that some pre-tenured professor or tenured professor is going to raise their hand and say, "Oh yeah, I'll do all the accrediting for people that want base experiences in our department." I don't really see that being a valuable piece of a tenure track faculty member's workload. So I do think there's going to have to be some centralized approach to it. With respect to Boise State again, specifically, the conversations I've had about professional development credit have been a little bit more encouraging, in the sense that there's less overhead as far as registration goes for somebody wanting professional development credit. Now, it's not the same as graduate credit, it's not the same as undergraduate credit, but and the fee structure changes quite significantly, in the sense it can be less expensive. But if a department were to say, and I'll give you our case, and it's not, you know, we have professional educators all over the country who are looking to get PD credit because it goes toward their raise or their tenure, or just the fact that their state requires them to have X number of professional development hours every so often. I know the same is true with probably health education and nursing. They probably have to have the same thing. So what Boise State can do, what I understand, is that the department itself vets the material and then gives that information to the people in extended studies and distant campus, and says, you know, if once this person enrolls, if this person satisfactorily completes this content, then he or she can pay, I think it's $60 per unit, and you can have 1 to 3 units of professional development credit. I think it's 15 per. So a two unit professional development credit would be 30 hours, and a 3 unit would be 45. That's actual real hours. It's not like the calculus that we do within our own classes. You know, 3 hours in class, then 9 hours outside of class, blah blah blah. In professional development world, it's actually 15 hours. 15 hours of content experience. So when they're able to do that, question just a moment. When they're able to, if departments vet that material, thanks for coming. Then it's possible for the student to register not as a degree-seeking student and have to worry about transcripts and all the other stuff that goes along the overhead of enrolling as a student at Boise State, but goes through a much, I don't say cleaner, it's a more direct path. I won't say cleaner, because we have to do what we have to do to register students, but then once that material, once that student's knowledge has been vetted by the department, the student pays a small fee, or that fee can be added on to by the department, and that person can receive professional development credit. So, for example, in the math department, where you might have math teachers who need to have professional development credit in, you know, maybe they're middle school math teachers and they need to do some PD on teaching statistics, or just statistical knowledge. And the math department then looks at a MOOC that has, or a Khan Academy or whatever else, and said, you know, this amount of knowledge would constitute what we would teach if we were doing 15 contact hours for you to learn more about statistics. And if you show on our, maybe we have an online test in Blackboard, if you show that you can go through that stuff, we're not creating the content, we're not going to get ourselves involved in that overhead. If you can go through that content, you can come in and take our test, and we will give you, for a small fee, we will give you 15 professional development hours from Boise State University in statistics. Now, if only 3 people do that, it might not be worth the work. If you say that it's $100, let's just say, for a person to get that includes department costs plus the PD class cost here at the university, $100, and you have 1,000 teachers across the nation that want that credit authenticated by Boise State. I'll let you do the math. 1,000 times 100, and how that works out in the department of where would that money be useful for a department. In the day and age that we live in, I would think it probably would be. So there are a lot of economic incentive to doing things like this, to giving credit for MOOCs where others are not. So.
I was wondering that, is that the same thing as they used to call it continuing education?
Yes, yes, yeah, PD and continuing education credit, basically.
So PD is actually, professional development hour is 1 hour in the seat at a meeting. Or
exactly, that's my understanding, yeah.
10 to 15 of those is equal to?
I think 15 hours is equal to 1 CE or PD credit. Okay. 30 is 2, 45 is 3. And what also makes PD credit a little bit easier is that they're not constrained by semesters. Right now, if we say you're going to get credit for a MOOC, it kind of has to happen within the existing semester structure that we have. With continuing ed, professional development credit, it can happen outside that window because you can set it. You can say it's going to start September 15th and end February 15th. But we can't do that for graduate credit. You know, in our department, we're looking at, well, how do we give credit for MOOC experience, if it doesn't end by December, whatever, 10th in the fall semester, do we just give an incomplete because the MOOC might end January 15th, and do they just carry the incomplete for a semester, and then we go back and change the incomplete, which is, it adds more overhead. I mean, you just require more time at that point. And again, if you only have 5 students doing it, not a big deal. If you have 5,000 students doing it, it's a pretty big deal, so. Yeah. Other questions? Any questions, especially comments about what we're going to do with accreditation? Concerns?
I guess part of, there is a bit of a difference. If you took, 5 MOOCs online,
mm-hmm.
and while you were a high school student, and let's suppose, by then you really knew calculus. Do we give, and again, high school student did this, so that's maybe that's a bad example, but there is some when you do a 15-week course, it's often that what you're really testing is, can the student learn, kind of master the material in the time frame given. We're not asking them, could you learn calculus if given 5 years? And
do you think that's an artifact, though, of the university structure?
Well, I'm not saying that the 15 weeks is necessarily, but it is a bit arbitrary. But we are, in some sense, measuring, can you do this in a finite amount of time? And if somebody...
I see your point. I see why.
That's what you get credit for.
Right.
On the other hand, maybe that should change.
I think it will. I mean, the fact is that somebody doesn't give if somebody's getting a PE, a professional engineering license, that's not something that can happen immediately out of school. Typically, I think and I know my sister's a PE. I don't know, and a lot of friends who are PEs. I don't know much about it, to be honest. But I do know that there's a certain amount of work experience that goes along with it, as well as a test that's authenticated. But if you're a PE 15 years after you start your engineering job, or 3 years after, it doesn't matter. You're still a PE. So at the end of it. So.
No, the real world doesn't care. But again, the reason they don't care is because they kind of understand that if you went through a standard engineering degree and you did it in, say, 4 or 5 years, that's already implicit in what that PE degree means.
Right. Well, but so the opposite is true then. I say, so we care about students who have taken 15, they complete this. Again, this is just a conversation, and I think it's a good question to explore. I do think the idea that we're giving people credit for completing it in a certain amount of time is problematic. And I would say that only because if I look at special needs students who are in a high school who might have a learning disability, the fact that takes them a year to get through a course go back to Shakespeare, as opposed to a semester,
mm-hmm.
I don't know that it matters. They need more time. And whether somebody has taken 5 years to do it because there are kids or because there's deployment or something else that is intervened, I don't think it necessarily matters. But if we say that it's going to be problematic, and I know you're not suggesting this, it's just a conversation, but it's going to be problematic for somebody who's gotten the calculus credit because he or she has taken it over 5 years, then would we be similarly opposed if somebody got the calculus credit in 1 week? And again, I don't know if there's a model for that, but if you have particularly astute young person who's gone up through algebra and just gets it, I mean, why? In
there are mechanisms for that already, though.
Right.
Student is really showing that they can do this stuff in half the time it takes everybody else.
Right.
Then
So we don't react negatively when people can complete it faster.
But
Why would we react negatively when people take longer?
But there's also limits to the number of times. For example, I think engineering has limits. You can only take calculus 3 times. If it takes you more than 3 times to pass calculus, they don't want you as an engineer. You know, and it doesn't matter
if you can pass it.
But if that 4th time you're able to get the A, sorry, that's too late. You know, they figure there is some kind of value in being able to do it the 1st or the 2nd time, and not after having taken the course 8 times.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because they are licensing people who presumably could work on the job as an engineer.
Right. And I'm not. Yeah, I'm not
you
just.
don't get. You know, you get a limited amount of time to be able to complete projects. You
Right.
don't get an unlimited amount of time. And so there's a certain kind of filter that's built in.
Sure, and where it authenticates real practice, I would have no problem with it. If it's just an artifice of overhead, if it's just logistically we don't want to deal with a student for a 4th semester in calculus, I think that's the decision the institution makes. And I don't blame people for not wanting to deal with a student for the 4th time. It just is a realistic thing. But if a student after 5 years can finally get the A, and that was the one hurdle, and the rest of it is just smooth sailing, then why are we preventing that person from being an engineer? I mean, again, I think it's a good conversation to have. And that's certainly, but some of what you just mentioned is a lot of what's wrapped up in this, you know, these considerations at the higher education who are, you know, it's ironic that we consider ourselves as innovative as we do, and yet there are some things that are so entrenched that we just can't let them go. And that might be one of them. I don't know. And sometimes it's entrenched for a really bad reason. We've done it. We've always done it that way. And sometimes it's entrenched for a really good reason. Is you know what? When a person goes to an engineering job, you know, he or she does not have a year to figure out this problem. It has to happen in 3 weeks. And that's the type of competency we're looking. No, if we're testing that and we're assessing that, that's fine. I mean, that's part of the job. It's just like an EMT. You know, if you better not take 28 times to get the IV line in. It better happen like once, maybe twice. And if it's an elderly patient with really bad veins, maybe 3 times we'll give you. But it's going to happen quickly. So they don't care if you get it right on the 30th time. Because by that time, you're going to have to deal with a different issue with the patient. So that's, yeah, that's a good issue to talk about. So that's all I have. I don't.
Well, thank you so much, Ross. I was thoroughly engaged, and I hope that the online viewers were too. And great to see you guys in person here in the room today. And I really appreciate you leading the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next Friday, same time. We'll have a panel with Ross, Dale Pike, and a couple of students who have taken MOOCs, just kind of to talk about what the experience is like with 15,000 other peers.